Mama. Welcome to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Michelle Gibbs, and this podcast exists to help scholarly mamas like you to achieve your life and academic goals without sacrificing what matters most. Here, we're changing the overwhelm, juggle, struggle narrative around what it means to be a mama on an academic journey to one of empowerment, fulfillment, and purposeful success. So how do we successfully navigate these journeys? Well, first, we need the space to embrace this unique blend. Let's begin by saying yes to creating a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside, because that's when we truly become purposefully whole. So get ready for the most non-traditional, unconventional, and revolutionary approach to PhD motherhood, because one thing I have learned over my many years of experience on this journey is that if you want something different, you have to do something different. But you must be brave enough to think differently first. So, Mama, are you in? Fabulous. Let's begin. These are our journeys of becoming. It's 5 a.m. You've been up twice already with your sick child. You've got 3 hours before your first lecture. You've still got some marking that's outstanding. You still haven't finished preparing the slides for the lecture. And somehow you've got to squeeze in edits to that publication that's been hanging over your head for months. Not to mention, you've got to book a doctor's appointment for your little one. You've got to sort them out for childcare for the day. And everything feels like it's crumbling. My guest, Dr. Paulina Cossette, who's on the show today, this was her more or less daily experience for quite a long time. And I guess she'll share more about her story as we go into the episode. But one of the things that I really want to dive into today's episode is the fact that success is not a one-size-fits-all kind of journey, especially for scholarly mamas. And I want to challenge you with this question. So, what if the path that you're on isn't the only option? What if you could redefine success entirely on your own terms? Like I said, my guest today, Dr. Paulina, discovered this firsthand after 12 years in academia. She was a political science professor and she became a mum on the tenure track, and she found herself working 7 days a week and, barely having stolen moments with her little one between all the deadlines and all the things that she needed to do. And she began to wonder where her joy went. And I want to explore with Paulina today how she redefined that success and what she did to explore the options beyond the traditional academic path, and also to talk about the freedom that came for her in designing a life that really aligned with her values. And this conversation is for every scholarly mama who is wondering what success could look like if you wrote the definition yourself. Because the truth is that there are countless ways to use your brilliant mind while honoring all the other parts of who you are. And I think it's important to remember that this is Paulina's experience. This is her lived experience. And, I really enjoy listening to people's experiences and how they have tackled some of the challenges that they've encountered. But remembering that we have to own our own experience, right? This is her lived experience. And even if you decide to take a different path than Paulina has, there's still a lot of wisdom and nuggets that we can take away from her sharing on the episode today. So without further ado, let's tune into the episode. I hope you enjoy. And by the way, if you love this podcast, make sure you leave a lovely review at the end of the episode. Let's dive in. So Paulina, first of all, thank you so much for being here. As I would have introduced you, and I know our listeners will gain so much from this conversation. So thank you so much for your time today. But I just wonder whether you would, you'd be happy to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your own PhD and academic journey.
Sure. And thank you for having me. It's great to talk with you. So I grew up in Florida and I got my PhD from the University of Florida in 2013. It's in political science and I specialized in US politics. And I was the kind of kid who was always good in school. I loved school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I went into the PhD program. I just knew that I loved being in school and I figured I would figure it out along the way. And so, like many academics, I did all the things I was supposed to do. I got good grades. I wrote a great dissertation. I started publishing journal articles. I got a tenure track job as an assistant professor. And I thought, I kept thinking that, oh, when I finish my PhD, it'll get easier. And then when I get a tenure track job, it'll be easier. And then when I get tenure, it'll be easier. And it never got easier. It got harder, especially when I had my son, when I was working. And I think that was what ultimately drove me out, was that I realized that it is not going to get better. Especially having children. Everybody says that academia is flexible, and I think that's the biggest myth in the world, that it's not flexible. You're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so that plus, we were living somewhere we didn't like. We wanted to move back to Maine, where my husband grew up, to live near family, to raise our kids there. And that ultimately drove me out in 2019. And that's how I left.
Wow, what a journey you've had. I always think about some of the lessons that we learn along the way and how we can help others who may be coming up to those same hurdles in their own journey. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was, what's one thing that you wish mamas knew about their career options post PhD, and perhaps what you wish that you'd known sooner? Obviously you had, you had that traditional academic pathway, but then you went a different path in your career. So what do you wish that mamas who are on the PhD journey, what do you wish that they knew about their post PhD career options?
That's a great question. I think, when we're in academia, we are told so often that the only way to find success is to go on the academic job market and to become a professor. And that's not true. The vast majority of PhDs don't go into academia. They go and do other things. And yet we are taught to have that tunnel vision and to think that that is the only way that we can define success. And so I think even if you believe that your dream is to be a professor, and if it is, that's fantastic. It can be a wonderful job for a lot of people. I would still encourage people to consider other options, because you never know what can happen. Maybe you have a health crisis in your family, and, maybe a parent becomes ill and you need to go live somewhere else and be a caregiver, and there's no academic jobs there. Maybe you go on the market and you're not able to land a job that you want in a place you want to live. There's all kinds of things that can happen. And I made the mistake of being very passive about this, assuming that things were going to work out. And they did, per se, but um you just never know what's going to happen in life. Your tastes can change. So I think take the time in graduate school to explore, to do an internship or volunteer at a nonprofit, or connect with people and network with people who work in government or in healthcare or in whatever areas you think you might be interested in. And there's no harm in making those connections and networking and learning about what people do. If you decide to become a professor anyway, great. But at least you know what's out there, and you're not caught off guard, at the last minute trying to scramble and get a job.
Yeah, I think that is really good advice, because one of the things that I've realized, certainly in my own journey, as a PhD student and now as a post PhD, was that, like, we assume that when we begin that journey, that the goals and dreams that we have, the ambitions that we have, the vision that we have for our career is going to stay the same. Like, that is going to be it for us. And actually, what the reality of the situation is that changes. We change as people, our goals change, our circumstances change, especially if you're navigating this journey as a mom. And it's okay for that to happen. It's okay for that shift to happen. We don't have to stay on this rigid trajectory where we feel like if we're doing something that's outside of that, or that's taking us in a different path, taking us into some sort of pivot, that we're failing for some reason. And so I think just knowing your options and knowing the different directions that your PhD can take you, the doors it can open for you, in other areas, in other, in other fields, in other industries, I think that's really quite a good place to be, because then you don't have to feel like you're failing because you've changed direction. Like, that's okay, because we are evolving people. We don't necessarily have to have the same goals, the same ambitions, and never divert from that.
Absolutely. I mean, academia, there's this expectation that you get your job and you stay there for 40 or 50 years until you die. And you're 80 years old in your office still writing your last book. And first of all, it's absurd to me that people work that long. But setting that aside, every other career, people don't necessarily stay in the same field. They jump around. They do, if you're in business or something, maybe you start out as an accounts person or a salesperson, and then you go into marketing, and then you go into some kind of executive role, right? We're all, like you said, we change as people, we grow as people, and doing the same thing, teaching the same classes over and over again, can be so boring. So yeah, if you get there and you decide you're bored or you're burnt out or it's not right for you, absolutely, don't buy into that cultish idea that doing something else is failure, because the only way we should define success is what makes us happy and what gives us the kind of life that we want to live.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And one of the things I've been thinking about recently is this idea of, like, and I say this to my sons as well, like, whatever career path you choose, first of all, it doesn't have to be set in stone, but whatever choice you've made, it's not who you are. It's what you're doing, and it's what you're doing for that season of your life. And, I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of PhDs make is they put their identity in what they're doing. It becomes who they are. And I think that we are so much more than our PhD journeys. We're so much more than our academic titles and all of that. And if we focus on the skills that we are developing on that journey and the person we're becoming on that journey, those are things that are, transferable. Those are things that we can use in so many other areas of our careers. And by thinking about what we do and not who we are, in the sense of like that being our identity, it gives us so much more flexibility and leverage to be able to take those skills and use them in a different way.
Yes, absolutely. And I think if your listeners can, if they're in graduate school or earlier in their careers, if they can prepare for that now, it will
Yeah.
make those transitions so much easier. Because in my program, I teach academics how to become editors and coaches, and that is one of the toughest hurdles that they face in the beginning, is they have internalized that identity of I'm a professor so deeply. And the idea that being anything other than a professor is sort of not, not good enough, or you don't measure up
Yeah.
unless you're faculty,
Yeah.
or a researcher. That's internalized so deeply that we actually spend time at the beginning of our program talking about how do we shift our identity from professor to editor or business owner or whatever. And it's hard, but I think that if you can sort of prepare yourself for that possibility and realize, like you said, that we are not our job. Our
No,
job is our job, and we are so much more complex than that. Um,
absolutely.
it will make that transition much easier and that if you can have that flexibility.
So true. So I'm curious, during those 12 years that you've spent in academia, what were some of the most challenging moments that you experienced in trying to maintain boundaries between your work and personal life? Because obviously these lines get blurred sometimes. So how did you navigate that?
I think, in general, the toughest thing was the fact that the work would just keep piling up. There were situations where no matter what you did, there was always more work to do. If you finished your syllabus, then you had to start preparing the lectures. If you finished the lectures, you had to start preparing the assignments. And then on holidays, vacation time, it wasn't a time to rest and recharge. It was the time to do all the research and writing that you hadn't done during the semester because you didn't have the time. And of course, there you can always do more research. You can always publish another paper. It never ends. And I did not know how to set boundaries for myself to say, you know what, I don't need this extra article. I don't need to go to this conference. And so that really was exacerbated when I had my son, because obviously babies take over your life.
Yeah.
And, I think I was sleeping maybe, well, he didn't sleep at all. I was awake every 2 hours to feed him.
Oh.
And so for that last year that I was in academia, which was the first year of his life, it was excruciating. I was working 7 days a week. I remember staying up till midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, scrambling to finish my lectures for the next day. My department had, I was lucky I got a semester of maternity leave, but then when I got back, my department assigned me a new prep for a brand new course I had never taught before, which of course is a ton of work. And I couldn't do it. I got to the point where I had been unhappy for a long time, but I realized I just couldn't do it.
Hmm.
And I didn't know how to establish those boundaries. I don't think anybody teaches us that. So that was really tough.
Yeah, gosh, I can imagine that must have been really hard for you. And especially doing that with an infant, incredibly tough. I can only imagine.
Yeah, and there were a lot of other things that happened just in departmental politics and American politics, which I taught, and that just made it clear to me um, that the university expects us to give everything we have. When they want you to do something, you are part of the family, and we're all in this together. And
Hmm.
then when something happens to you and you need their support, they abandon you. And I had left before COVID, but I'm in some of the academic mamas groups on Facebook. And I remember seeing people talking about how because of COVID, they had to move their courses online overnight. Okay, this is a severe situation. We need to do this for people's health. But then when the universities decided to go back to teaching in person, it didn't matter if you had a kid who hadn't been able to get a vaccine yet. It didn't matter if you had an elderly parent who you were going to put at risk. You had to go back to the classroom, and they didn't care that you were personally, at risk. And so that was a really strong sign to me again that I made the right move leaving, because I really don't believe that the institutions in general care very much about faculty.
So looking back at that now, if you could sit down with your younger self over coffee, for example, what would you tell her about handling all of the pressures that come with academic life?
That's it's such a tough thing to think about, because it's almost, or like people will ask, if you could go back and get your PhD again, would you do it, or something like that?
Mm,
And it's like you don't really understand all of this until you've been through it. It's like
yeah.
you have to go through all the hard lessons to really have a sense of what's going on. I think if I could have a conversation with my younger self, I would say stop caring so much about what people think.
Yeah.
Your classes don't have to be perfect. Your lectures don't have to be perfect. Your papers don't have to be perfect. Just put it out there and do the bare minimum. Do what you're required and contracted to do. And remember that it is a job. You are getting paid for your labor. You're doing a lot of labor that you're not getting paid for. And so let your effort reflect that.
Do you think it was worth it?
Getting the PhD?
Yeah, like that whole journey, like what you just said, like when people ask you, was it worth it? Like, how do you answer that?
I do think it was worth it. I loved my experience in graduate school. You know, I was the nerdy kid, and never really fit in until I went into my PhD program, and that's where I met people they became like family, and you know, I felt like I really fit in and was understood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also really love the skills that I learned, the analysis, the statistics, the writing. You know, I couldn't be an editor and do what I do today if I hadn't finished the PhD program and gotten that experience publishing and everything. I used to be terrified to speak even just in class. I was very shy, and you know, when you have to be a professor, you can't be scared of that. And so it sort of forced me to learn public speaking.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I think it was a really difficult process along many points of that journey, but I came out of it a lot stronger than I was when I went in.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. And I can agree in the sense that some of the skills, again, going back to this idea of focusing on the skills and you know, the growth that happens on that journey, even if you don't end up in academia, even if you choose a different path, like those are skills that you can really utilize in so many other areas. And, you know, to have gained those skills, I think it does make it like, you know what, I don't look back on this with regret, but it was hard. And maybe some people are thinking to themselves, like, I could have got these skills somewhere else. But, you know, we look back on it and we give thanks because we've accumulated skills that can be quite useful in other areas. So you talk about working 7 days a week when you were in your academic role. And I'm just curious about how that schedule evolved. Did you just kind of like, did it just happen gradually, like creep up on you? Or were there specific points where you felt that you were being pushed into this kind of non-stop overworking routine?
I think the further I went in my career, um, you know, when you're a grad student, you don't serve on committees really. You don't, maybe you're not even teaching classes. I didn't teach a course until my last year or two in the program. You really have very few responsibilities compared to what's piled on you as junior faculty. And you know, you even like my first year on the tenure track, they don't require you to serve on a committee. They want you to get used to the job and everything. And so the more years you spend in that role, they just keep piling more and more. Teach another class. Oh, you know, somebody else has to have sabbatical or whatever, so we need you to teach their class for them, or serve on this committee, or do this job, whatever, and advise this student organization. And it's like it just keeps piling on. Meanwhile, your salary doesn't increase. You don't even get cost of living adjustments, you know. And then I think having my child was the straw that broke the camel's back, because I just didn't have time anymore. I had to care for this person, and I also realized that I wanted to care for that person. I just didn't want to do the work anymore. It was no longer fulfilling. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it did take quite a while, but I also, I think, waited too long to leave. You know, I suffered for a long time before I finally got the courage to leave.
So you talk about, well, actually, one of the things that jumps out to me in listening to you is this idea of having the courage to leave, having the courage to walk away. Could you walk us through what that courage actually looks like for you? And the reason why I'm asking you this is because some of our Scholarly Mama listeners may be wrestling with similar feelings of, you know, should I leave academia? Am I courageous enough to do that? What courage do I need to be able to do that? So can you like paint that picture for us of what that actually looks like, coming up with that courage to walk away? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I planned it out and was very strategic, but it wasn't like that at all. I think, probably for 4 or 5 years, I was very unhappy. I at the first school where I had my first tenure track job was not the right place for me, to put it mildly. So I went on the market and I got a different job at a different school. And I thought, well, I'll try it out here. Maybe it was the school. Maybe I'll really enjoy being at this different school. And it was better, but the overwork was still there. The burnout was still there. The piling on of responsibilities was still there. And I realized that the problem wasn't the school, it was academia. And I was there for 2 years, I think, before I quit. And I think, I just got to my breaking point. I think, like I said, after having my son, I had postpartum depression, I had postpartum anxiety. It was just a huge mess, is the only way I could put it. And my mother-in-law was diagnosed with lung cancer, and
Oh,
it was all of these pressures that came to a head. And um it was in the summer, I think. And I said to my husband, I was like, we just have to leave. We have to quit. We have to leave. We're not happy here. We're never going to be happy here. And I remember shaking, calling my department chair to tell her I was quitting. I think it was June or July, and I was supposed to teach in the fall. And the real moment of clarity came for me when the provost called me and she was trying to convince me to stay. And she said, "What if we give you a year off and you take a break and you come back in a year? Would that be okay?" And I thought about it and I realized as I was on the phone with her that I could do that, but the problems aren't going to change. I could come back in a year and be rested. I'm still going to be miserable. My husband's still going to be miserable. We're still not going to be living where we want to live. And I think that was the real moment where things shifted for me. And it became very clear that there is no situation where I will be happy in that kind of job. Um, and so actually the act of quitting is what convinced me that I was doing the right thing. That's not great advice for anybody, but um, I did find Annie Duke has a book called Quit, which I think is really helpful. It helps you, if I were to go back or if I were to suggest to others, I would say make a list of the things that you truly value in your life, the things that you really need to be happy, and think very carefully whether or not you can have those things and keep your academic job. And if you can't, that's okay. You can be happy and not have an academic job. There are millions of people out there who are very happy and they're not academics, including me now.
Absolutely. I'm reading. I just finished a book today, actually, called "How Will You Measure Your Life?" And it's really an interesting book. It's written by an academic, but the book is called "How Will You Measure Your Life?" And he was talking about his academic area focuses in business and marketing, and he talks about this idea of like understanding theory and how theory can help us understand not just theories that are relating to business, because that's his like academic focus, but theories that can be extrapolated to real life. And he talks about a theory that's talking about everything that we do in our lives, in other words, has a purpose, but he calls it has a job to do. And so it's really important to understand what job is that thing serving, like what job is that serving in your life? What is that in your life to actually do? And that can apply to employment and careers. And sometimes we assume that, our jobs are there to kind of be everything to us, to obviously be compensation for give us compensation for the work we're doing, but also to give us all this joy and happiness. And actually, sometimes it's courageous to walk away from situations where it's not actually doing the job it's meant to do, or it's not actually fulfilling the goal that it's meant to fulfill. And so yes, it takes a lot of courage, but also it's this clarity that you talk about where you realize this isn't actually hitting the mark for me. And whether I stay and continue with this or whether I leave for a year and come back, it's still not actually doing the job. And so it has to go, because otherwise I'm going to be miserable. I'm going to be unhappy. I'm going to be unfulfilled. And you don't do your best work under those conditions. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think, we tell ourselves so much, I should be happy doing this. This is what I've always planned to do, is to be a professor. I'm supposed to be good at this. I'm supposed to enjoy it. And really, none of that matters. Like, if you're not happy doing it, that's the only thing that matters. There's no more shoulds or whatever. If it doesn't make you happy, go find something that does,
Absolutely.
Because you can find other jobs that do make you happy, despite what we've always been told.
So true. So you mentioned being able to take real vacations now without the guilt that you obviously had when you were in academia, which really struck me, because academic guilt is something that many of our listeners grapple with and struggle with. So how did you unlearn that academic guilt mindset, and what advice would you give to those that are still in that headspace?
Well, I remember the moment it was like a Christmas vacation or something. Whenever we had summer or Christmas vacation, we would come up to Maine to see my husband's family. And my father-in-law said, and he didn't mean to be mean about this or anything, he was just making the observation, whenever you're here, you always are working on your laptop. Oh. And he felt sorry for me. He felt badly that I couldn't just take time off. And that really hit me. I realized, like, God, he's right. I don't ever take a vacation when I don't bring my work along with me. I have work to do. And when I left academia, I think it became very clear to me how much work we do that's unpaid. I kept getting these requests from journals. Oh, will you review this paper? And I found it very easy to say, sorry, I'm not an academic anymore. I don't, I can't help you. Because why would I do that? Why would I spend my time reviewing a paper if I'm not getting paid for it, if it's not contributing to my career anymore? And I think when you are finally outside of academia, you realize that, especially owning your own business, there are activities that you do that result in you making money, and there are activities you do that you don't make money, so you learn when you're running a business to invest your time and energy in the things that have the greater payoff. Marketing yourself, creating a better product, courses, whatever your program is that you're selling. And it's much easier to get all of that done and say, okay, I'm going on vacation for a week with my family. Everything I've needed to do is taken care of. I don't have to think about it when I'm here. I put my email responder on that says I'm on vacation, and you just have that hard and fast rule, whatever works for you. And for me, it's vacation time is sacred. And, I want to lay on the beach and not have my phone with me. And I think you realize when you're running a business that the services you offer people, they have to pay you for. And you no longer feel guilty that, that you're not constantly giving to everybody, right? I think it becomes more of a clear exchange of, I'll do X and you'll pay me Y for that. And you realize if you're not getting paid, then you shouldn't be doing the work. And so that, for me at least, that's the guilt goes away.
I think that's one of the things that I have observed in academia as well, doing things for the love of research kind of thinking. And one of the things that strikes me outside of those academic walls, is that your time especially is very precious. And if people are asking you to do a certain role within your job, that's part of your work time. It's not expected for you to be doing that in your personal time. And so, but I think the challenge with academia is that quite often those lines are really blurred. And so, I can see what you're saying is definitely true. And I think what I've experienced outside of academia is the opposite of that. Like, there's no expectation for you to be working, outside of your contracted hours, which I think is really good, because that's what work-life harmony is supposed to be about. It's not for you to be constantly working and overworking and burning yourself out. It's about recognizing that there are boundaries there, and those boundaries need to be enforced. And that goes both ways. Obviously, like, during your work time, you should be focusing on your work, but outside of that, like, that's your personal time. That's not time to be, overworking and doing more.
Yeah, I think a lot of non-academic employers have realized that they need to treat their employees well and give them that time off if they want them to do the best, when they are at work.
Absolutely. So, as someone who's experienced both the traditional academic trajectory, and also then went on to build your own business, I'm curious about what insights you can share about how you think academic institutions could better support work-life harmony for academics or PhD students who are also mamas and, who are mothers. And are there any changes that you think could actually enhance this experience?
I think there certainly are changes, but I don't have high hopes that they will be made by institutions. I think, childcare is probably the biggest challenge for graduate students and faculty. I don't think if I had gotten pregnant when I was still in graduate school, I don't think I could have finished. And I am in awe of people who do, because it just takes up so much of your time,
Mm-hmm.
And if a university could provide childcare at an affordable rate for parents, then that allows you to do your work. It allows you to focus, because no one can do work when they've got a child, clinging to them or wanting to play with you or whatever. And that's probably the biggest thing. But I also think that there needs to be a bigger focus on mental health and teaching graduate students how to implement boundaries so that they can have a life where they're happy. And we're going to continue to see this bleed of academics resigning from burnout until that changes, because when you're in graduate school, they teach you how to publish, but nobody teaches you how to teach. Nobody teaches you what it means to serve on a committee. Nobody tells you you're going to have to do all these other things when you become a professor. I had no idea. I was sitting in my training for my first job, the orientation, and they're like, "Oh, we're talking about committee service." And I'm going, "What's a committee? I don't even know what this means." And so I think graduate programs could go a long way into supporting people, especially parents, if they would just have workshops on this sort of thing. When you become a professor, this is what you're going to have to do. And here's how you can create balance. And here's how you can set boundaries. And, this is what you should prioritize when you're trying to get tenure. And don't worry about this other stuff. Or, make it acceptable to not do everything.
Yeah. And, I think you make a really good point there, especially in regards to well-being and mental health. I think that's definitely something that is grossly overlooked. And so many PhD students don't reach the finish line because they are burnout. They are burnt out. They are overwhelmed, and they just can't see a way through the fog. And the support is pretty minimal in the sense that it's up to you to figure that out most of the time. And so I think one of the things, and I laugh when you say you're in awe of people who've done motherhood and PhD life at the same time, because I did that. I've got 3 sons, and I had 2 of them. I had one of them before I started my PhD and 2 of them during my PhD. And it was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I will say that. And I think a lot of people try to make this look really easy. And I'm grateful that I was able to finish. I'm grateful that I finished well. But I will say it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And a lot of times that was down to the fact that I was learning trial and error. I was learning how to navigate this journey as a mom, how to look after myself and prioritize my well-being. And that was going against the grain because it wasn't something that anybody really cared or talked about. In fact, most of my colleagues didn't even have kids anyway. And so I think there's an extra layer of care that's needed when you are navigating both of these journeys at the same time. It is hard. It is incredibly hard. And we need to pay, as moms, we need to pay a lot more attention to our well-being, our mental health when we're on this journey, because we've got kids to look after. Like we've got to be present and show up for our families. We can't allow ourselves to become completely burnt out by this PhD. Like that isn't worth it in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and it all has trickle down effects, because if we are unwell, if we're stressed out, that's going to bleed over onto our kids. And
Absolutely.
I know I'm definitely the best mom when I'm focused on self-care and,
Yes, rested.
resting and taking time for myself. That's not working. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think if graduate programs could, even something as small as creating a group, a
Yeah.
meeting group where you meet once a month as moms with
Yeah.
bring your kids, and talk about it.
Yeah.
You can get support that way.
Absolutely. So you've transitioned from academic to academic editor, and I find that really fascinating. But how has this changed your definition of success? We talked about that early on in the episode. How's that shift from academic to entrepreneur? How has that changed how you define success?
I think the thing I like best about running my business is that, first of all, I get to do whatever I want, and I don't really have to answer to anybody, other than, making sure my clients are happy with my work. But everything that I do for me and the business. And when you're in academia, success is publishing and getting good teaching evaluations and getting a good annual review from your department chair. And all of your energy is pushed into efforts that pay off for other people. They make the department look good because more students want to join your major, or, they make the school look good because you've brought in these grants, or you have to make the school look good in the community or whatever. Everything is for everybody else, and you don't get anything back. You don't get appreciation. You don't get a pay raise. You don't get anything. And when you're running a business, you get to choose what success looks like. If you want to make a lot of money and that's what you think success looks like, then go for it. If you want to make money, that a decent amount of money that's enough for you to pay your bills and be comfortable, but you only want to work 20 hours a week and you want to spend the rest of the time with your kids, go for it. That's what you want, And so you get to choose, and it doesn't have to stay the same. When your kids are little, you can work 20 hours a week and be with them. And when they start getting older and go into school and they don't need you as much, you can ramp up the business and start making more money, or, whatever it is. And so I think the beautiful thing about being a business owner is that you're not working for anybody else. All of your energy is exerted for yourself, and you get to reap all of those benefits.
That's really interesting. Do you think that there's any possibility of having work-life harmony even if you are in academia? Like, do you think that that is a realistic expectation, or do you think that that is just not achievable?
I think it is achievable because I know people who are perfectly happy in academia. My best friend is a finance professor. She earns about 3 times what I did when I was teaching, so that's probably part of it. But um, you know, um, I spend a lot of time thinking about this question about what is it about those of us who burn out and who leave versus people who are perfectly happy to stay. And one of the answers, I think, is that those of us who burn out do so because we are emotional people. We are affected very much by the way other people treat us. We are not good at, if somebody makes a rude comment in an apartment meeting, we're not good at just brushing it off. I think other people are good at doing that. They're not as sensitive. I think those of us that burn out are more sensitive, more emotional. And we give, we give and we give to our students, to our colleagues. We're the ones who are always answering the call when something needs to be done. And that to me is the recipe for disaster. I think that if you are going to succeed in academia, you have to be comfortable with doing very little or not being the one who's always helping, who's always giving. And maybe that means that you're focused on your research and, doing what you have to do to teach a good course, but you're not always the one who volunteers to plan the events or to order the awards for students or, whatever, all that other stuff we have to do. And you have to be okay with people treating you poorly because that happens a lot in academia.
That is a really interesting thought. One that I must say, I've never thought about that. And I think now as we're having this conversation, I'm reflecting on what you just said. I think that's actually true to some degree, because to a large degree, actually, because when I look at people that I know who have left academia, who have burnt out, or who've just like say, you know what, this is not for me, they have been those highly sensitive individuals. I am a highly sensitive individual as well. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I've chosen to take my career, leave my career, I should say, because my career, as I said before, I went to do my PhD, but I've chosen to leave that outside of academia for now. And I think that it's, I haven't had any bad experiences in that context, but I know myself and I know what I've observed, and I know that I am that highly sensitive person. So if what you are saying is true, then maybe that's not for me either.
No, I consider myself a highly sensitive person too. And if there's anybody who's not familiar with that term, Elaine Aron has a great book about being a highly sensitive person. And I do think that I want to be clear that there is nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with being somebody who's not okay with being treated badly, who's not okay with microaggressions and sexist comments and, all of that stuff that comes along in the academic environment. It is perfectly okay to not be willing to put up with that. And it's also perfectly okay to be someone who wants to give a lot, who wants to give yourself and your energy to your students. But I think where is important to recognize is that if that is true of you, those are wonderful qualities to have, but you need to exercise them in a more supportive environment.
Yeah.
Because academia is not that place. It is not going to give you happiness and satisfaction, because it's not built to deliver appreciation. It's expecting you to serve and to never be thanked or rewarded for anything. And I think why I've found so much joy in my business is because I'm doing all the things that I love. I'm engaging with academic research, even if it's not my research. I'm editing and digging into people's writing. I'm teaching in my program that I have, but the difference is that my clients all appreciate me and are very grateful and say so. And the people who make up my students now in my program, they're the type of people who all do the reading, and they're grateful, and they show up to our Zoom meetings, ready to talk and discuss, and they're kind to each other and they support each other. And so you can have all the things that you wanted in academia, the teaching, the research, all of that, and just do it in a different context where you are appreciated.
Yeah, just take the skills somewhere else. So one of the things that strikes me about what you said there just now as well is the impact or the importance of, you know, having people in your little micro environment within, if you're in academia or if you're outside of academia, your this little micro environment, the people that you work with every day, your perhaps your line manager and these kinds of things, to have people that are really allied to you, like they're really supportive of you and helpful and not toxic. I think, you know, I've always said that, you know, that relationship, that line management relationship or that supervisor relationship can really make or break an experience. And where you have support and allyship and, you know, just opportunities are opening for you and people who really want the best for you genuinely, I think that can kind of soldier a lot of the toxicity that may be around you outside of that little micro environment. But also, I just wanted to make the point that you can have that in academia. You can have supportive supervisors. You can have amazing professors that are genuinely concerned, genuinely care, genuinely encouraging, genuinely want the best for you. And then you can have the opposite of that. And also outside of academia, you can have, you know, supervisors and managers that are amazingly supportive. And you can also have the opposite of that. So I think really it's about understanding who you are, what suits you, what kind of environment you want to allow yourself to be in. And if you find yourself in an environment where it becomes toxic, it's not working for you, then to have that courage, whether it is in academia or outside of academia, to have the courage to say, this is not for me. This is not for me. This is not healthy for me. This is not the environment in which I thrive. And to find a way to take yourself out of that environment and find something where you can actually thrive.
Yeah, I think we have to be able to let go of the idea that success is defined as tenure or,
Yeah.
staying in academia forever.
Yeah.
When you really think about it, there's no reason to believe that. Success is doing whatever it is you want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
there's more people who are outside academia than who are in it. Are all those people failures? No, of course not. So
Absolutely.
I think we have to make that mental shift in our identity, like we were saying earlier,
Yeah.
that let go of this story we've been told that academia is the only way to succeed, and realize that you can engage in all the activities you love and the job, the type of work that you love, but in a different context that also gives you joy.
Absolutely. And when I think about jobs and careers and things, I always break that down. I don't care about the title. I don't care about the institution. I want to know, what is my day to day going to be like? Like, what is my day to day? Am I using the skills that I have? Am I excited about the work I'm doing? Is it exciting me? Is it making me curious? Is it letting me be creative? Like, am I able to be autonomous? Like, these are the things that really matter to me. And so it's about focusing on the actual work that you're going to be doing, not on the title and not on the institution and not on this narrative that we tell ourselves where it's like, oh yes, I've done a PhD, so I have to work in academia. Like, you don't have to. There's so many options out there. And I think it's important to really seriously explore those. Like, talk to people who are not in academia, talk to people who are using their PhD in creative ways in other industries, and get a flavor of what's possible for you outside of the academy.
Yeah, and I will say that those of us who have left academia, we are always happy to talk to people who have questions about it, because we remember how hard it is to make that decision. And I've heard this from countless other academics who've left. Just message us, connect with us on LinkedIn, send us an email. We are always happy to give feedback or to chat, so don't ever hesitate to reach out. We love supporting other people who want to leave.
So good. So good. So regarding your PhD and previous academic career, is there anything that we haven't talked about so far, that you would have done differently that you want to share with the scholarly mama who's listening to this right now?
I think just, don't wait so long to make a change. And I'll come back to that book by Annie Duke called Quit. She says that she uses this story about these guys who were climbing Mount Everest, and there's a rule that says if you have not reached a certain point on the mountain by 1 p.m. on the day you're supposed to reach the summit, you have to turn around. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason that they have that rule is because if you wait and you wait and you wait, it becomes harder and harder to quit. You can see the summit, you're so close, but the people who do keep going end up dying because they think they can make it. They think that just a little bit longer, I'll be okay, I'll do it. And then you end up hurting yourself or dying because you haven't prioritized your safety. And I
Mm.
think that's such a great analogy for academia is yes, you can keep trying. You can wait till you get tenure. You can wait till you get a promotion. You can try going to another school. But what are you sacrificing in the meantime,
Yeah.
So if you could start out in your journey and saying, look, these are the three things that I need to be happy. I need to have time with my kids. I need to have work-life balance. I need to have a decent paycheck, whatever. And then you realize a year or two in, you give yourself a year or two. If I don't have these things by 2 years from now, I'm doing something else, right? It becomes a lot easier to quit, to shift gears, um, if you have that decision rule in place. So I think if anybody thinks they may not be happy in academia, prioritize what is important to you and don't be afraid to give up because really you're just wasting time. You're wasting time being miserable.
You know what? As you're talking, I'm thinking about the mama who's listening to this, who is, feeling really overwhelmed on her PhD journey and thinking like, oh, like, should I even keep going with this? And I've thought a lot about that. I've thought a lot about, because I was on the brink of quitting my PhD many times. And I kept going, but I'm just like, as I reflect on what you're saying, I think one of the things we really need to normalize is quitting, is pivoting. And obviously none of us can tell anybody what's the right decision for them because everybody's circumstances are unique and individual, and they've got to do their due diligence and look up, do their research and decide for themselves. But I think if we can normalize that, if we can normalize this idea of shifting, career shifting, field shifting, industry shifting, just pivoting when it's necessary, like without guilt of thinking like all these sunken costs. Oh, I've invested so much, I've done all this, because at the end of the day, like, you may continue to your own detriment. But I also want to say that if there is somebody who is, very close to finishing, you can still push through and finish, but you don't have to stay in academia. You can finish that PhD and use it in a different way. Use it in an industry or a field, or even, as a business or whatever it is that you want to do. But using those skills in a different way is still possible if you carry on and finish your PhD. It's not a kind of like, this is a trajectory and there's no other option for me.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what you were saying earlier about think about what you want your day-to-day to look like.
Yeah.
If you can get a job that gives you the life you want and it doesn't require the PhD, then who cares? Go get the job,
Yeah.
Stay in the program and apply to the job. And if you get it, then quit the program, If the job and the life that you want requires the PhD, then do your best to stick it out and finish it because there is an end point.
Yeah.
It does end eventually, and then you can go on and have the life that you want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we come to the end of our time together today in this episode, where can people get in touch with you if they want to?
So my website is acadiaediting.com. And if anybody's interested in learning about becoming an editor or an academic coach, you can go to acadiaediting.com/become an editor. And I'm on Instagram and stuff, but mostly I'm on LinkedIn. So please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk with anybody about any of this, especially other moms.
Oh, I love that. And it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show and to give us a different perspective, of what we can do, options that we have outside of academia. I think is so important. And it's so good to hear that from someone who's done that, who's navigated that journey successfully. And, you look back on that without regret. So I think it's lovely to have had you on the show. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and if you did and you want in on this movement, please head over to mrsmummyphd.com or scholarlymamas.com. If you want to do your PhD well without sacrificing yourself or those you love dearest, then you need your hands on all the ways that we can work together to transform your journey of scholarly motherhood from one of overwhelm, disillusionment and burnout to one of scholarly joy and purposeful success. Make sure you head over to mrsmummyphd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. I cannot wait to work with you. Remember, Mama, these are our journeys of becoming.